Hey guys, tonight we are diving deep, really deep, into the layers of a city that never sleeps, but hopefully you will by the end of this. Imagine you're standing on a street corner in New York City. Look up. Towering giants of glass and steel pierce the sky. A modern forest so dense it creates its own weather patterns. Now imagine peeling those layers back, one by one, like an impossibly complex onion, right down to the very first shelters built on this land. It's a journey through centuries of ambition, innovation, and the occasional architectural faceplant. And speaking of survival, let's be honest, the sheer volume of architectural history we're about to wade through, well, you probably won't survive this with your eyes open the whole time, and that's perfectly okay. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It really helps the channel and ensures you don't miss our next sleepy exploration. And hey, why not drop a comment below telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there? It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your feet aren't on concrete anymore. Instead, you feel the soft give of earth and fallen leaves, a springy carpet underfoot. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp soil, maybe a hint of the salty tang from the nearby waters. You're in Manhattan, the island of many hills, long before it was a grid of avenues and streets. This is the realm of the Lenape people. Look around you. The structures that dot this landscape are born of the forest itself. You see the gently arching silhouettes of wigwams, smaller, more intimate dwellings, perhaps housing a single family. Young, flexible saplings are driven into the ground, bent and tied together at the top to form a sturdy dome. This framework is then covered with whatever the season and location provide. Large sheets of bark from elm or birch, woven mats of reeds and cattails, or even animal hides. Inside, it's surprisingly cozy. A central fire pit, its smoke escaping through a hole in the roof, provides warmth and a place to cook. The floor might be covered with furs or woven mats for comfort. You can almost hear the murmur of voices, the crackle of the fire, a stark contrast to the city's future roar. Then, you come across a much larger structure, a longhouse. Some of these could stretch for 100 feet or more, a communal home for several related families. The construction is similar to the wigwam, a frame of sturdy poles but elongated like a loaf of bread with an arched roof. Inside, compartments line either side of the central corridor, each a family's private space, yet open to the shared life of the longhouse. Multiple hearths would punctuate this central aisle, their smoke mingling as it rises. It's a testament to a communal way of life, deeply intertwined with the rhythms of nature. The Lenape were skilled hunters, fishers, and farmers, cultivating corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters, in clearings near their villages. Historians still argue whether Lenape settlements were truly permanent year-round villages or more seasonally occupied camps within a larger territory, their movements dictated by the availability of resources. Some evidence suggests a pattern of summer villages near fertile planting grounds and winter hunting camps further inland. It wasn't just about idyllic living, though. You might notice that some larger villages are, in fact, surrounded by a palisade, a defensive wall of sharpened logs, a quirky tidbit revealing that life wasn't always peaceful. The Lenape name for Manhattan, Mannahatta, is a well-known historical fact, generally accepted to mean island of many hills, a beautifully descriptive name for the undulating terrain that would one day be flattened and grid. Trying to assemble one of these intricate bark-covered longhouses with today's flat-pack furniture instructions would probably lead to a very rustic and likely very leaky disaster. But for the Lenape, it was home, perfectly adapted to their environment, a light footprint on the land. But the scent on the wind is changing. You detect something new, something foreign. The distant thud of an axe rings out, not with the rhythm of someone clearing a small patch for planting, but with a more relentless, systematic purpose. Tall ships, like strange, winged creatures, have appeared in the harbor, and with them, a new kind of people with new ideas about what a home, and indeed, a settlement, should look like. You're now stepping into the nascent world of New Amsterdam, the Dutch outpost at the southern tip of this very same island. Gone are the flowing, organic lines of the wigwam and longhouse. Instead, you see sharp angles, straight lines, and a determined, almost stubborn, assertion of order. The Dutch, ever practical, are building to last, or at least to withstand the unfamiliar challenges of this new world. The first structures might have been quite rudimentary, simple wooden huts, perhaps even dugouts shored up with timber, but very quickly, more substantial buildings begin to rise. You notice the distinctive stepped gables, their outlines like staircases against the sky. These aren't just for show, though they do lend a certain European charm. They also reflect a practical Dutch approach to building on narrow plots. Remember, this fledgling town is already beginning to feel a little confined, shall we say? Land is valuable, especially near the protective walls of the fort. Those gables often concealed hoists for lifting goods into the attic storage spaces, a common feature in the merchant houses back in Amsterdam. The materials are different too. Wood is still plentiful, of course, and used extensively, but you see more and more brick, often brought over as ballast in the ships, or fired locally as kilns are established. Stone, too, is used for foundations and sometimes entire walls. These houses are sturdy, 2 or 3 stories high, with narrow frontages but often stretching back quite deeply from the street. Walk along what will one day be Pearl Street, its curves still echoing an ancient shoreline. The paths are not yet paved with uniform stones, but are more like well-trodden dirt tracks, perhaps with a few rough cobbles here and there. Look at the windows, small panes of glass, because glass was a precious imported commodity. Shutters are common, providing security and protection from the elements. Imagine peering through one of those small, diamond-paned windows into a dimly lit interior. A large fireplace would dominate one wall, essential for warmth and cooking. The Dutch, despite the rough-and-tumble nature of a colonial outpost, brought their love of order and cleanliness. Legend has it they were scrubbing their stoops, even as the mud of a new continent tried to reclaim everything. It makes you wonder if they had tiny little Dutch Roombas, powered by miniature windmills, tirelessly sweeping away the dirt of the New World. Of course, this whole enterprise is famously built upon Peter Minuit's 1626 purchase of Manhattan from a group of Lenape, a mainstream historical fact recording the transaction for 60 guilders worth of trade goods. It's a moment that has become legendary and endlessly debated in terms of its fairness and the very concept of land ownership, which differed vastly between European and indigenous cultures. Even with their sturdy houses, the Dutch weren't entirely secure. Archaeologists and historians still debate the exact layout and extent of the earliest Dutch fortifications, like the defensive wall built across the island's width in 1653 to protect against potential English or Native American attacks. That very wall, long since dismantled, gave its name to one of the most famous financial streets in the world, Wall Street. And a rather charming, quirky tidbit for you. Amidst the practicalities of fort building and trade, the Dutch also brought their love of gardens. Even in the cramped confines of New Amsterdam, they cultivated plots of tulips, vegetables, and herbs. Some even laid out bowling greens, proving that even pioneers need their leisure time, perhaps after a long day of avoiding rogue cannonballs from passing ships. Just kidding mostly. These early Dutch houses, solid and unpretentious, were the seeds from which a very different kind of city would grow, their gabled roofs a fleeting architectural signature before the next wave of change. The salty air now carries a different inflection, a more clipped, authoritative tone replacing the guttural sounds of Dutch. You feel a subtle shift in the very atmosphere of the streets, a straightening of posture, perhaps. The Union Jack flutters where the Dutch flag once flew. New Amsterdam is now New York, and the English are in charge, bringing with them their own distinct architectural preferences and a more formal approach to town planning. You walk the same paths, but they're slowly, almost imperceptibly, becoming more defined. The random scattering of Dutch houses, charming in their irregularity, begins to yield to a more deliberate order. The English, with their penchant for symmetry and classical proportions, start to impose their will upon the landscape. You notice the new buildings rising are less about the quirky, individualistic charm of the Dutch gables and more about a sense of sturdy, respectable uniformity. This is the era of the Georgian style, named after the Hanoverian kings back in England. Think balance, proportion, and a certain understated elegance. Facades are typically symmetrical, a central door, flanked by an equal number of windows on either side, repeated on the floors above. You see a lot of brick, often laid in neat, precise bonds like Flemish bond, where the headers, the short ends, and stretchers, the long sides, of the bricks alternate in each course. This creates a pleasing visual texture and signals a more sophisticated level of craftsmanship. The quirky tidbit here is that sometimes, due to the cost or scarcity of good-facing bricks, builders would use higher quality, more expensive bricks only on the street-facing facade, while the sides and rear of the building might be constructed with rougher, cheaper common brick. A little bit of architectural sleight of hand, if you will, a colonial business in the front, party in the back approach to brickwork. The windows themselves are changing. The small, diamond-shaped panes of Dutch casements are giving way to larger, vertically sliding sash windows, usually with multiple panes. 6/6 or 9/9 became common. These not only let in more light, but also contribute to the overall sense of order and regularity in the facade. Doorways become more prominent, often framed with pilasters, flat, rectangular columns, and topped with a pediment, a triangular or sometimes curved decorative element. It's all very proper, very much a statement of stability and British cultural dominance. You can almost imagine the new inhabitants sipping tea behind those well-proportioned windows, discussing the latest news from London, perhaps complaining about the colonial postal service. Some things never change. The streets themselves are evolving. While the old Dutch street plan in the lower part of the island largely remains, those winding lanes like Stone Street or Pearl Street are echoes of this earlier time. There's a growing effort to pave more thoroughly. You see more cobblestones, carefully laid, making passage easier for pedestrians and the increasing number of horse-drawn carts and carriages. Sidewalks, though perhaps not as grand as they will become, are starting to be delineated. It's a slow process, this taming of the urban environment, but the intention is clear: to create a more civilized, more English-feeling town. The famous Frances Tavern, still standing today, is a prime example of this Georgian architectural style, built in 1719 as a grand residence before becoming a tavern and a significant meeting place during the Revolutionary period. It's a mainstream historical fact that George Washington gave his farewell address to his officers there in 1783. Imagine the conversations, the clinking of glasses, the weighty pronouncements that echoed within those brick walls. Historians still argue whether the transition from Dutch to English architectural styles was a rapid imposition or a more gradual fusion, with Dutch building traditions lingering and subtly influencing the new English forms for decades. Certainly, some Dutch-style houses continued to be built or maintained, creating a blend in certain neighborhoods. You can picture an old Dutch burgher, stubbornly refusing to update his stepped gable, glaring across the street at his new English neighbor's perfectly symmetrical facade, perhaps muttering about the decline of good, sensible Dutch architecture. It's the kind of neighborhood squabble that probably involved passive-aggressive flower planting. Beyond the individual buildings, the very idea of the city structure is being reconsidered. While the most famous grid plan is still some way off, you can sense a desire for more rational organization. Land is being surveyed and parceled out with greater precision. Public buildings, too, begin to reflect this new English order. St. Paul's Chapel, completed in 1766, stands as a magnificent survivor from this period. Its elegant spire and classical portico speak of an established Anglican presence and a commitment to building structures of lasting significance. Walking into St. Paul's, even today, you get a palpable sense of that colonial era's aspirations, a quiet dignity amidst the later cacophony of the financial district. Its survival, especially through the tumultuous events of September 11th, 2001, when it served as a refuge and relief center, adds another layer to its profound history, though that's a story for much later in our journey. The homes of the wealthy merchants and colonial officials are becoming grander. You might see details like coins, dressed stone blocks at the corners of buildings, adding a sense of strength and formality. Roof lines are often hipped, sloping down on all four sides, or gambrel, the distinctive barn-like shape with two different slopes on each side, which was practical for creating more usable attic space. Inside, you'd find more elaborate woodwork, carved mantelpieces, decorative cornices, and perhaps even wallpaper, an increasingly fashionable import. Life is becoming more comfortable, more refined for those who can afford it. You can almost smell the beeswax polish and hear the rustle of silk dresses. The port is bustling, the lifeblood of this growing colonial city. Warehouses, sturdy and functional, line the waterfront, built to withstand the rigors of commerce and the occasional battering from a nor'easter. The architecture here is less about polite society and more about robust utility, but it's an essential part of the city's fabric. The smells of tar, salt, spices from distant lands, and undoubtedly, less fragrant emanations fill the air. This constant exchange, not just of goods, but of people and ideas, is shaping the city as much as any architect's plan. The English period solidifies New York's role as a key commercial hub, laying the groundwork for its future economic might. The cobblestones you're treading are no longer just random rocks. They're part of a deliberate effort to pave the way, quite literally, for a more ordered and anglicized urban experience, a foundation upon which even grander ambitions will soon be built. The echoes of cannon fire and cries of liberty are fading, and a new, distinctly American identity is beginning to assert itself, not just in politics, but in the very bricks and mortar of the city. You're now walking through New York in the aftermath of the Revolution, a city eager to shed its colonial skin and embrace its role in the fledgling United States. The Georgian style, with its strong associations with British rule, while not entirely abandoned, starts to evolve into something that feels more American. This is the dawn of the federal style, and you can see its refined elegance taking shape around you. It's like Georgian architecture put on a slightly more slender, more optimistic, and definitely more patriotic suit. The lines become a little cleaner, the ornamentation more delicate, and often infused with new national symbols. You might spot eagles, stars, or other patriotic motifs subtly incorporated into decorative elements. Look at the doorways. They often feature fan lights, semicircular windows above the door, sometimes with intricate tracery and slender sidelights flanking the entrance. These create a brighter, more welcoming entryway than the often more imposing Georgian portals. It's a subtle shift, but it speaks volumes about a newfound confidence and openness. One quirky tidbit is the occasional use of oval or elliptical windows, particularly in gable ends or as accent features, adding a touch of neoclassical grace that was very much in vogue. Think of it as architecture winking at you. Brick remains the dominant building material, but you see a greater emphasis on smooth facades, sometimes with a lighter color palette. Red brick is still common, but you might also see painted brick or even facades of stone. The proportions are still based on classical ideals, but there's a lightness, a certain attenuated grace to federal buildings. Inside, rooms might be oval or round, reflecting the period's fascination with neoclassical forms. You can almost hear the rustle of early American newspapers and the serious discussions about the new Constitution taking place within these refined spaces. It's a style that speaks of aspiration, of a young nation finding its architectural voice. Gracie Mansion, the official residence of New York City's mayor, originally built in 1799 by Archibald Gracie, is a wonderful example of federal architecture, showcasing its elegant proportions and characteristic details. It's a mainstream historical fact that it was initially a country house overlooking a strategic bend in the East River, far from the then bustling city center. But the changes aren't just stylistic, they're also about scale and planning. The city is growing and fast. The old, somewhat haphazard layout of Lower Manhattan is proving insufficient for the ambitions of a new commercial capital. This is where the famous Commissioner's Plan of 1811 comes into play, a truly transformative moment in New York's architectural and urban history. Imagine city planners, probably with a very large ruler and an even larger dose of can-do spirit, laying a vast, uncompromising grid over the entirety of Manhattan Island, from Houston Street northwards. Avenues running north-south, streets running east-west, all numbered, all rigidly geometrical, with little regard for the existing topography of hills, valleys, and streams. This was a bold, almost audacious move, driven by a desire for order, efficiency, and, crucially, the easy division and sale of land. You can see the beginnings of this grid being etched onto the landscape. Surveyors are at work, marking out the future lines of streets and avenues that will define the city for centuries to come. It's a stark contrast to the winding, organic streets of older European cities, or even the earlier parts of New York itself. Historians still argue whether the 1811 grid plan was a stroke of pragmatic genius that facilitated New York's explosive growth, or a monotonous, soul-crushing imposition that erased the island's natural character and preempted more humane, varied urban design. There's truth in both perspectives. It certainly made development straightforward, but it also led to a certain uniformity. Imagine the poor fellow whose charming, rambling farmhouse suddenly found itself diagonally bisected by the proposed line for Fifth Avenue. Progress, he probably grumbled, is a surveyor with no respect for a well-tended vegetable patch. As this grid begins to take shape, a new type of dwelling becomes increasingly common, the row house. You see them springing up, street after street, uniform in height and setback, creating continuous, harmonious streetscapes. These are typically 2 to 4 stories high, narrow but deep, sharing sidewalls with their neighbors. The federal style lends itself beautifully to these rows, with their repeated patterns of doorways, windows, and simple cornices creating a sense of rhythm and order. This was affordable, efficient housing for a rapidly expanding population, from prosperous merchants to artisans and clerks. Inside, the layout was often standardized: a basement kitchen, a parlor level for entertaining, and bedrooms on the upper floors. It's the architectural embodiment of a growing middle class. You notice, too, the development of the first public squares and parks, though not yet on the scale of Central Park. Places like Washington Square, originally a potter's field and site of public executions, a rather grim origin for such a lively spot today, begin to be laid out and surrounded by elegant federal-style row houses. These green spaces offer a respite from the increasing density of the city, a place for promenading and social gathering. The city is starting to breathe, to think not just about individual buildings, but about the collective experience of urban life. The waterfront continues to be a hive of activity, adapting to the demands of growing trade. New wharves and warehouses are built, perhaps a little more systematically now, aligning with the burgeoning grid. The air is thick with the sounds of commerce, the creak of ships' timbers, the shouts of dock workers, and the clatter of goods being loaded and unloaded. This economic engine is fueling the city's expansion, providing the wealth that builds those elegant federal homes and funds the ambitious grid plan. The young republic is asserting its presence on the world stage, and New York is its leading port, its gateway to the world. The federal style, with its quiet confidence and embrace of classical ideals, perfectly mirrors this moment of national self-discovery, while the expanding grid prepares the island for the unprecedented growth that is yet to come. You can almost feel the pulse of a city on the verge of something enormous, its future streets stretching out like an invitation. The crisp, clean lines of the federal style are beginning to feel a little restrained, perhaps even a bit too polite for the booming, boisterous city New York is becoming in the first half of the 19th century. You sense a yearning for something grander, something more expressive, and the architectural landscape starts to bloom with a profusion of historical revivals. It's as if the city has raided a giant historical costume closet and is trying on everything for size. You're now wandering through an era where looking back became the fashionable way to move forward. First, you encounter the commanding presence of the Greek Revival. Inspired by the architecture of ancient Greece, seen as the birthplace of democracy, this style resonated deeply with the ideals of the young American Republic. You see buildings that look like miniature Greek temples, with imposing porticos supported by sturdy Doric, Ionic, or Corinthian columns. Public buildings, banks, churches, and even grand private homes adopt this classical mantle. Think of Federal Hall, rebuilt in the 1830s on the site where George Washington took the oath of office. Its massive Doric columns and austere grandeur are pure Greek revival, a statement of solidity and civic virtue. It's a mainstream historical fact that the original Federal Hall on this site was where the Bill of Rights was adopted. The current structure, though, is a testament to this Hellenic craze. It's all very noble and serious, as if Pericles himself might stroll out for a souvlaki. The details are key. Thick cornices, pediments, often smooth ashlar stone facades, or stucco scored to resemble stone. Windows are typically large and rectangular, often with simple, unadorned surrounds. It's a style that speaks of permanence, of timeless values. You can imagine the city fathers, perhaps in togas, probably not, but it's a fun image, discussing weighty matters of state within these temple-fronted edifices. One quirky tidbit is the surprising number of quite modest wooden houses, particularly in outlying areas or smaller towns influenced by New York trends, that would sport a miniature, sometimes slightly wobbly, Greek temple portico tacked onto the front. It was like putting racing stripes on a sensible family carriage, a touch of aspiration. But the classical world isn't the only source of inspiration. You also see the pointed arches, traceried windows, and soaring verticality of the Gothic Revival making their appearance. If Greek Revival spoke of democratic ideals and civic order, Gothic Revival often evoked a sense of romanticism, piety, and a connection to a more medieval, perhaps more spiritual past. Churches are the most obvious candidates for this style. Trinity Church, at the head of Wall Street, rebuilt in its current magnificent Gothic Revival form in the 1840s by Richard Upjohn, is a prime example. Its soaring spire, stained glass windows, and intricate stone carvings would have been a dramatic counterpoint to the classical temples of commerce nearby. You can almost hear the hushed tones of prayer and the swell of organ music emanating from within. The Gothic Revival wasn't limited to churches, though. You might see it in grander homes, with crenellated roof lines, Tudor arches, and decorative barge boards on the gables. It's a more picturesque, less rigidly symmetrical style than the Greek Revival, allowing for a greater variety of forms and textures. Historians still argue whether the simultaneous popularity of these two seemingly contrasting revival styles, the rational, classical Greek and the romantic, medieval Gothic, represented a deep cultural confusion or a rich eclecticism born of American optimism and a desire to draw from all of history's best ideas. Perhaps it was just architects having a really good time showing off their historical knowledge, like DJs mixing ancient civilizations. Tonight, we're going Doric, but for the after party, it's strictly flamboyant Gothic. And then, amidst these stone and brick revivals, something truly revolutionary begins to happen, particularly in commercial architecture. You start to see entire building facades made not of stone, but of cast iron. This is a game changer. Cast iron could be molded into incredibly ornate patterns, mimicking classical columns, elaborate cornices, and all manner of decorative details. But it was far cheaper and quicker to produce and erect than carved stone. Entire facades could be ordered from a catalog, manufactured in a foundry, and bolted together on site. This allowed for much larger window openings, flooding interiors with natural light, a huge advantage for shops, warehouses, and early department stores. You're now walking through areas like Soho, which would later become famous for its cast iron architecture. Look up at these buildings. The slender columns, the intricate tracery, the sheer expanse of glass. It's a new kind of urban fabric. Many of these cast iron fronts were designed to look like stone, painted in light colors and sanded to mimic its texture. It was a clever illusion, a kind of architectural cosplay. The Bogardus building, constructed in 1849 by James Bogardus, a pioneer in cast iron architecture, was one of the earliest and most innovative examples, though sadly, it's no longer standing. His work, and that of others like Daniel Badger, transformed the commercial streets of New York. This was factory-produced architecture, a precursor to modern prefabrication. It also meant that if a piece got damaged, you could, in theory, just order a replacement part. Imagine trying that with a chunk of your Parthenon S-Bank. This ability to create elaborate, classically inspired facades relatively cheaply democratized grandeur to some extent. Suddenly, even a modest commercial enterprise could present a very impressive face to the world. It was also remarkably strong, allowing for those larger windows and more open interior spaces. Of course, its main vulnerability was fire. Cast iron can warp and buckle under extreme heat, leading to catastrophic collapses, a lesson learned the hard way in several major city fires of the era. But the allure of its versatility and aesthetic possibilities was undeniable. You can almost smell the hot metal from the foundries, hear the clang of hammers, and see these intricate metal puzzle pieces being hoisted into place, creating a new, lighter, more transparent kind of streetscape, a shimmering mirage of historical forms rendered in modern metal. The city is flexing its industrial muscles, even in its architectural dress. The revivals continue, but now a new, more ostentatious spirit is infusing the city's architecture, particularly in the grand mansions of the burgeoning millionaire class and the public buildings designed to project an image of imperial power and cultural sophistication. You're stepping into the Gilded Age, a period of unprecedented industrial growth and staggering fortunes, and the architecture is designed to show it all off. Subtlety is, shall we say, taking a bit of holiday. Think opulence, think scale, think more is definitely more. The dominant style for these palatial residences and grand civic structures is Beaux-Arts. Originating from the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, this architectural approach emphasized symmetrical, grandiose designs, drawing heavily on classical Greek and Roman forms, but often with a healthy dose of French Renaissance flair. You see massive stone facades, elaborate sculptural ornamentation, grand staircases, and lavish interiors. Fifth Avenue becomes Millionaire's Row, lined with chateaux and palazzi that would look perfectly at home on the grand boulevards of Europe. The Vanderbilt family, the Astors, the Carnegies, they're all building these monumental homes, each seemingly trying to outdo the last in splendor. Imagine the parties, the rustle of silk ball gowns on marble floors, the hushed conversations in rooms filled with European antiques and priceless artworks. It's like an arms race, but with an excessive amount of cherubs and pilasters. Public buildings embrace this style with equal enthusiasm. The New York Public Library on Fifth Avenue, designed by Carrere and Hastings and completed in 1911 after years of construction, is a quintessential Beaux-Arts masterpiece. Its majestic marble facade, the iconic lion statues, patience and fortitude, guarding the entrance, the grand reading rooms. It's all designed to impress and inspire. Similarly, Grand Central Terminal, completed in 1913, is another monument to this era's ambition. Its vast main concourse, with its celestial ceiling and soaring arched windows, is not just a train station. It's a cathedral of transportation, a breathtaking public space. It's a mainstream historical fact that the constellation on Grand Central ceiling is actually painted backwards, a detail whose origin is still debated. Was it a mistake or an intentional God's eye view? One quirky tidbit from this era of extravagant domestic architecture is the sheer specialization of rooms within these mansions. You wouldn't just have a dining room. You might have a breakfast room, a formal dining room, and perhaps even a separate supper room. There were reception rooms, drawing rooms, libraries, billiard rooms, music rooms, conservatories, and of course, numerous bedrooms, each with its own dressing room and bathroom. Some even had dedicated rooms for arranging flowers or storing cigars. It was a level of domestic complexity that required a veritable army of servants to maintain. You can imagine a new maid getting hopelessly lost, wandering for days through a labyrinth of parlors and pantries, occasionally bumping into a startled footman. "Excuse me, is this the silver polishing scullery or the third-floor left-wing linen closet?" But while these horizontal palaces are consuming vast fortunes in entire city blocks, something else is happening, something that will fundamentally alter New York's skyline and its very identity. Buildings are starting to climb. The invention of the safety elevator by Elisha Otis in the 1850s, famously demonstrated by him cutting the rope while standing on an elevator platform, which then didn't plummet, a rather brave marketing stunt, removed one major barrier to taller buildings. Who wants to walk up 10 flights of stairs, even in a Beaux-Arts masterpiece? Coupled with this, the development of steel frame construction is the real game changer. Instead of relying on thick, load-bearing masonry walls, which become impractically massive for very tall structures, architects begin to use a strong, relatively lightweight skeleton of steel beams to support the building's weight. The exterior walls become mere curtains hung from this frame and can therefore be much thinner and incorporate more glass. You're witnessing the birth of the skyscraper. Early examples are still somewhat tentative, often cloaked in familiar historical styles. A bit of Romanesque here, a dash of Renaissance there, as architects grapple with how these new tall buildings should look. The Tower Building, completed in 1889 and designed by Bradford Gilbert, is often cited as one of New York's first true skeleton frame skyscrapers, though it was only 11 stories tall and rather slender. Its construction was met with some public skepticism. People worried it might blow over in a strong wind. Historians still argue about which building deserves the title of the first skyscraper, as the definition can be a bit fuzzy, depending on whether you prioritize height, construction method, or a combination of factors. Chicago and New York were both early centers of skyscraper development, each pushing the boundaries. But in New York, the constraints of its island geography and the incredible value of land, particularly in the financial district, provided a powerful incentive to build upwards. If you can't spread out, you go up. You can see these early tall buildings, though they be dwarfed by later giants, starting to punctuate the skyline, particularly in lower Manhattan. They might have a classical base, a relatively unadorned shaft of office floors, and then a more elaborate cornice or cap, trying to give some aesthetic resolution to their newfound height. The Flatiron Building, completed in 1902, while not a steel frame skyscraper in the purest sense, it has a steel skeleton but also uses some load-bearing masonry, becomes an instant icon with its distinctive triangular shape, a masterpiece of Beaux-Arts styling applied to a uniquely challenging site. Its form, dictated by the intersection of Fifth Avenue and Broadway, shows how architects were adapting to the city's existing grid, even as they reach for the sky. The energy is palpable. New fortunes are being made, new technologies are enabling new architectural forms, and the city is transforming at a dizzying pace. The Beaux-Arts palaces speak of established wealth and cultural ambition, while the earliest skyscrapers hint at a future where the sky is, quite literally, the limit. It's a period of immense confidence, sometimes bordering on hubris, but it's undeniably exciting. You can almost feel the ground vibrating slightly from the constant construction, the air filled with the metallic tang of new steel and the chink of stonemasons' chisels shaping another cherubic adornment for a millionaire's doorstep. The tentative upward thrusts of those early tall buildings have now ignited a full-blown obsession, a frenetic, ego-fueled scramble for the heavens. You're in the heart of the 1910s and 1920s, and the competition to build the world's tallest building is raging, primarily right here in New York City. It's a period of incredible engineering prowess, daring financial gambles, and architectural styles still trying to find an appropriate expression for these unprecedented heights. The Beaux-Arts classicism that adorned many earlier structures begins to feel a bit heavy, a bit too earthbound for these aspiring giants. You see architects grappling with the aesthetics of the skyscraper. How do you make a building that's dozens of stories tall look elegant and not just like an oversized packing crate? The classical column analogy becomes popular. A building should have a distinct base, often several stories high, with grand entrances and retail space, a long, relatively unadorned shaft, the repetitive office floors, and a capital, an expressive top, often a pyramid, a temple, or some other decorative flourish to meet the sky. The Woolworth Building, completed in 1913 and designed by Cass Gilbert, is a stunning example of this approach, executed in a lavish neo-Gothic style. Nicknamed the Cathedral of Commerce, its soaring lines, intricate terracotta ornamentation, and majestic spire made it the world's tallest building until 1930. Frank Woolworth, the five-and-dime store magnate, famously paid for its $13.5 million construction in cash. Imagine walking into its opulent, cathedral-like lobby, all marble and mosaics, feeling utterly dwarfed and probably slightly underdressed unless you were wearing a top hat and spats. This period sees incredible advancements in construction techniques. The steel frame is king, but now it's being pushed to its limits. Riveting gangs, working at dizzying heights, become folk heroes, the Sky Boys, connecting the massive steel girders with deafening pneumatic hammers. Foundation engineering becomes crucial, as these immense structures need to be anchored securely to the bedrock of Manhattan, which, conveniently, is relatively close to the surface in many parts of the island. It's a mainstream historical fact that Manhattan's schist bedrock provides an incredibly stable foundation for its skyscrapers, a geological gift that has profoundly shaped the city's vertical growth. Without it, the skyscraper race might have looked very different, or perhaps taken place elsewhere. As buildings get taller, new challenges emerge. Wind bracing becomes a critical consideration. How do you stop these slender towers from swaying excessively in the wind? Elevator technology continues to advance, with faster, more efficient lifts needed to service the upper floors. And then there's the issue of light and air. As more and more tall buildings crowd together, the streets below risk becoming dark, sunless canyons. This leads to the 1916 zoning resolution, a landmark piece of legislation that profoundly shapes the look of New York skyscrapers. This law mandated that buildings incorporate setbacks, stepping back the profile of the building as it rises, to allow more light and air to reach the street. This is why so many older New York skyscrapers have that characteristic ziggurat or wedding cake shape. It wasn't just an aesthetic choice, it was the law. Suddenly, architects are designing buildings that look like they're doing a very slow, very rectangular striptease for the sun. One quirky tidbit from this era concerns the sheer audacity and speed of some of these construction projects. Rival developers would engage in espionage, try and find out the planned height of a competitor's building so they could secretly add a few more feet, or even just a taller flagpole, to their own design at the last minute to claim the title of world's tallest. It was a high-stakes game of architectural one-upmanship. You can almost picture architects huddled in smoky backrooms, sketching furiously, muttering, "If he's going to 700 feet, we're going to 710, and we'll add a giant bronze eagle on top." Just because historians still argue whether the primary driver of the skyscraper race was economic necessity, maximizing usable floor space on expensive land, or pure human ambition and the desire for prestige. Undoubtedly, it was a potent cocktail of both. Companies saw having their name on the world's tallest building as a massive advertisement, a symbol of their power and modernity. The public was captivated by these engineering marvels, following their progress with avid interest. You see buildings like the Equitable Building, completed 1915, whose sheer bulk and lack of setbacks, casting a 7-acre shadow, was a major catalyst for the 1916 zoning resolution. It's a behemoth, a monument to maximizing office space without much regard for its impact on the surroundings. Then, in contrast, you see the later buildings that gracefully incorporate the setback principle, creating more sculptural, dynamic forms. The Channon Building, 1929, and the Fred F. French Building, 1927, are fine examples, often adorned with early hints of the Art Deco style that would soon come to define the next generation of skyscrapers. They feature intricate brickwork, terracotta detailing, and often symbolic ornamentation that tells a story about the building's purpose or its builders. The race is relentless. The Bank of Manhattan Trust building at 40 Wall Street, now the Trump Building, and the Chrysler Building were famously vying for the title of world's tallest in the late 1920s. As 40 Wall Street neared completion, its developers confidently announced it would be the tallest. But William Van Allen, the architect of the Chrysler Building, had a secret weapon, a 185-foot spire that was secretly assembled inside the building's crown and then hoisted into place in a matter of hours, snatching the title. It was a brilliant, almost theatrical coup. The sheer bravado is astonishing. This competitive spirit, fueled by American optimism and a booming economy, at least until the very end of the 1920s, is literally reshaping the heavens above New York, creating a skyline unlike any the world had ever seen. The air crackles with the energy of creation and competition, the relentless rat-a-tat-tat of the riveters providing the soundtrack to an era of audacious vertical ambition. The somewhat frenetic, often historically draped ambition of the earlier skyscraper race now crystallizes into a style so dazzling, so synonymous with New York glamour, that it still defines the city's golden age for many. You're stepping into the shimmering, jazz-infused world of Art Deco. The late 1920s and early 1930s, despite the looming shadow and eventual crash of the Great Depression, see the completion of some of the most iconic and beloved skyscrapers ever built, structures that are pure, unadulterated eye candy. Forget the slightly anxious look of earlier towers trying to justify their height with Gothic or classical frills. Art Deco embraces verticality with a sleek, machine-age confidence. You gaze upwards, and the Chrysler Building, completed 1930, designed by William Van Allen, takes your breath away. Its distinctive crown, a series of radiating terraced arches made of stainless steel, gleams in the sunlight, designed to evoke the hubcaps and radiator grills of Chrysler automobiles. It's playful, it's flamboyant, it's utterly unforgettable. Remember that secret spire we talked about? This is its glorious home. The corners of the building are adorned with giant, stylized eagle gargoyles, which were actually based on Chrysler hood ornaments. It's a celebration of the automobile age, rendered in brick, steel, and gleaming Nyrosta steel. The lobby is a jeweled box of exotic woods, marble, and intricate inlaid designs, a truly immersive Art Deco experience. You can almost hear the champagne corks popping and the strains of a Gershwin tune. And then, of course, there's the Empire State Building, completed 1931, Shreve, Lenape, Harmon. For over 40 years, it held the title of the world's tallest building. Its construction was a marvel of speed and efficiency, completed in just over a year, an astonishing feat. Its design is more restrained than the Chrysler buildings, but no less impressive. A sleek, tapering limestone tower, it embodies the aspirational spirit of the age. Its famous mooring mast, originally intended for docking dirigibles, a rather romantic but ultimately impractical idea, adds to its iconic silhouette. It's a mainstream historical fact that the dirigible mast was never successfully or regularly used for its intended purpose, partly due to the strong winds at that altitude and the difficulty of mooring a massive airship. Instead, it became a platform for broadcasting antennas and a beloved, brightly lit symbol in the night sky. Art Deco is characterized by rich ornamentation, often drawing from geometric patterns, stylized natural forms, sunbursts, chevrons, zigzags, and motifs inspired by ancient Egyptian, Mayan, and Aztec art, as well as by the machine age itself, gears, speed lines, and streamlined shapes. Materials are often luxurious and reflective: polished granite, marble, chrome, bronze, and vitrolite, a type of pigmented structural glass. You see this lavish detailing not just on the exteriors, but also in the magnificent lobbies of these buildings. The lobby of the Channon Building, with its ornate bronze grilles and friezes depicting themes of progress and modern life, is a spectacular example. One quirky tidbit is the sheer amount of custom design detail in these buildings, extending even to things like elevator doors, mailboxes, and light fixtures, all meticulously crafted to fit the overall Art Deco scheme. It was total design, an immersive artistic environment. Trying to find an off-the-shelf, Home Depot-like fitting that would suit one of these lobbies would be like trying to put a plastic novelty horn on a Rolls-Royce. This style wasn't just for skyscrapers, though they are its most famous expression. You see Art Deco influencing apartment buildings, particularly on the Upper West Side and the Grand Concourse in the Bronx, with their decorative brickwork, streamlined corners, and often elaborate entranceways. Theaters, too, embraced the glamour of Art Deco, creating fantasy environments for moviegoers. Radio City Music Hall, completed in 1932, is a supreme example of Art Deco interior design, with its sweeping curves, luxurious materials, and grand, theatrical spaces. Historians still argue whether Art Deco was the last truly unified, popular decorative style before the starkness of modernism took hold, or if it was simply a flamboyant, but ultimately superficial flourish before a more serious architectural era. Regardless of the academic debate, its visual impact is undeniable. It captured the zeitgeist of an era that was simultaneously looking to the future with technological optimism and drawing on a romanticized vision of exotic and ancient cultures. It's a style that manages to be both modern and nostalgic at the same time. You'll notice the setback requirements of the 1916 zoning law are often handled with particular grace in Art Deco skyscrapers, the step forms lending themselves beautifully to the style's emphasis on vertical lines and dramatic silhouettes. Buildings like 70 Pine Street, originally the city service building, and the General Electric building, with its wonderfully whimsical, almost Gothic deco crown of stylized lightning bolts, showcase this synergy between zoning requirements and artistic expression. These aren't just office buildings, they are monuments, gleaming spires that define New York's image to the world. They represented progress, luxury, and an indomitable spirit, even as the economic storm clouds gathered. The sound of jazz seems to drift from every polished surface. The glint of chrome catches your eye, and you can't help but feel a little more glamorous just by standing in their presence. It's the architectural equivalent of a perfectly mixed cocktail, served in a crystal glass, with a view from the top of the world. The exuberant, decorative party of Art Deco couldn't last forever. And as you move into the post-World War II era, the architectural mood shifts dramatically. A new, more austere, and self-consciously modern aesthetic begins to dominate. You're now entering the age of the international style, a movement that had its roots in pre-war Europe, think Bauhaus, Le Corbusier, but found fertile ground in a rapidly changing and rebuilding New York. Gone are the chevrons, the sunbursts, the gargoyle-esque hood ornaments. In their place, you find sleek, unadorned glass boxes, an emphasis on functionalism, and a rejection of historical ornament. It's as if architecture collectively decided to swap its flapper dress for a very sensible, very rectangular, gray flannel suit. You see these new buildings rising, often with curtain walls of glass and steel, expressing the building's structure directly. The Seagram building, completed 1958, designed by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe with Philip Johnson, is a quintessential example and a masterpiece of the style. Its dark bronze mullions and tinted glass create an image of refined, minimalist elegance. It's set back from Park Avenue, creating a public plaza in front, a revolutionary idea at the time, sacrificing valuable ground floor retail space for civic amenity. This plaza, with its fountains and carefully proportioned space, became as influential as the building itself. It's a mainstream historical fact that Mies van der Rohe famously declared, "Less is more," a mantra that perfectly encapsulates the spirit of the international style. His attention to detail was legendary, extending to the precise spacing of the bronze I-beams on the facade, which are purely decorative. The real structure is behind them, but serve to express the building's verticality. Lever House, completed 1952, Skidmore, Owings and Amp. Merrill is another pioneering example, an ethereal blue-green glass tower that seems to float above a horizontal podium. It was one of the first glass curtain wall skyscrapers in New York and caused a sensation. These buildings were radical departures from the solid, masonry-clad towers that preceded them. They emphasize volume over mass, regularity over individual expression, and a sense of lightness and transparency. You can almost feel the hum of the fluorescent lights and the quiet efficiency of the modern office environment within. No more flamboyant lobbies. Instead, you find clean lines, open spaces, and often abstract art. It's all very serious, very controlled. This era also saw a huge push for large-scale urban renewal projects. Influenced by modernist urban planning theories, which often advocated for clearing out older, denser neighborhoods, sometimes labeled slums, regardless of their actual social fabric, and replacing them with superblocks of high-rise towers set in open green spaces. Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts is a major example of this approach. A complex of modernist buildings housing the Metropolitan Opera, New York City Ballet, and New York Philharmonic, created by clearing a whole swath of the existing cityscape. Similarly, numerous public housing projects like the Stuyvesant Town Peter Cooper Village development, though begun slightly earlier, its ethos fits this period, adopted this towers in the park model. Historians still argue vehemently whether these large-scale urban renewal projects were necessary interventions that modernized the city and improved housing for some, or destructive social engineering that displaced communities, destroyed historic fabric, and created sterile, isolating environments. The legacy is complex and often painful. Robert Moses, the powerful and controversial urban planner, was a key figure driving many of these massive transformations, wielding immense influence over New York's development for decades. His vision was for a city of highways and grand projects, often with little regard for the human scale or existing neighborhoods. You can imagine him looking at a charming, if slightly dilapidated, block of 19th century row houses and seeing only an obstacle to a new expressway or a complex of gleaming, identical apartment towers. One quirky tidbit from this era of out with the old, in with the new, is the sheer number of beautiful older buildings that were demolished with little public outcry, seen as old-fashioned and inefficient. The mindset was very much focused on the future, on progress as defined by modernist ideals. It was a period of architectural spring cleaning that, in retrospect, threw out a lot of treasures along with the dust. If only they'd had a citywide antiques roadshow back then, maybe some gems could have been saved from the wrecking ball by a kindly appraiser saying, "Actually, this Beaux-Arts cornice is rather valuable." The materials are different too. You see a lot of glass, steel, and precast concrete. Ornamentation is stripped away. Beauty is meant to derive from the purity of form, the elegance of proportion, and the honest expression of materials and structure. It's a very intellectual approach to architecture, a stark contrast to the more visceral appeal of Art Deco. The interiors of these buildings often feature open-plan offices, modular furniture, and a sense of cool, impersonal efficiency. It's the architectural backdrop to the Mad Men era, a world of sharp suits, sharper wits, and a seemingly endless supply of filtered cigarettes. While some hailed these sleek, rational buildings as the epitome of modern progress, others began to find them cold, anonymous, and lacking in human scale or connection to place. The uniformity of the international style, which looked much the same whether in New York, Chicago, or Berlin, started to provoke a backlash. The glass box became a term of derision for some. But there's no denying the impact of this period. It fundamentally reshaped large parts of New York, creating a new skyline of cool, crystalline towers and vast, reordered urban landscapes, setting the stage for the architectural arguments and rebellions that were to follow. After decades of those sleek, unadorned glass boxes and the sometimes brutal simplicity of modernist urban renewal, a restlessness begins to stir in the architectural world. You sense a growing fatigue with the strictures of the international style, a yearning for something more playful, more referential, maybe even a little bit weird. Welcome to the era of postmodernism, which kicks off in earnest in the late 1970s and flourishes through the 1980s and into the 1990s. It's like architecture suddenly remembered it was allowed to have fun again, raiding the historical dressing-up box that modernism had locked away, but this time with a knowing wink and a hefty dose of irony. You start to see buildings that openly and often cheekily quote historical styles, but not in the earnest, revivalist way of the 19th century. Instead, classical elements like columns, pediments, and arches are often oversized, fragmented, or rendered in unconventional materials and bright colors. It's history remixed, often with a pop art sensibility. Philip Johnson, who had been a key champion of the international style with the Seagram building, famously signaled this shift with his design for the and Amp T building, now 550 Madison Avenue, completed in 1984. Its most talked about feature is its Chippendale top, a broken pediment that looks remarkably like the decorative crest of a colonial-era highboy dresser. This was a deliberate, almost provocative rejection of modernist austerity, and it sent shockwaves through the architectural community. You can almost hear the gasps from the die-hard modernists. He put a furniture top on a skyscraper? Is nothing sacred? Color makes a comeback in a big way. After years of black, white, gray, and the occasional muted bronze, facades begin to sport granite in shades of pink, red, and green, often combined in bold graphic patterns. Ornamentation, banished by the modernists, returns with a vengeance, but it's often stylized, exaggerated, and self-consciously applied rather than integral to the structure. Think of Michael Graves' work, with its distinctive palette of blues, terracottas, and greens, and its use of simplified classical forms. While his most famous buildings are outside New York, his influence was felt. One quirky tidbit is the use of historical illusion as a design strategy. An architect might incorporate a shape or detail that vaguely hints at a Roman aqueduct, an Egyptian pylon, or a Renaissance window, but decontextualized and reinterpreted in a modern way. It was like an architectural inside joke for those in the know. The scale of buildings remains large, but there's an attempt to break down the monolithic quality of modernist towers. Facades might be articulated with different window types, varied materials, or setbacks that feel more decorative than functional. The aim is often to create buildings that are more engaging, more approachable, and less intimidating than their modernist predecessors. You might see a skyscraper with a base that tries to relate to the scale of the street, a middle section that's more businesslike, and then a flamboyant, attention-grabbing top. It's architecture with multiple personalities, and it's not afraid to show them. Historians still argue whether postmodernism was a genuinely innovative movement that successfully challenged the dogmas of modernism and reconnected architecture with history and popular taste, or if it was a superficial, overly ironic, and ultimately rather silly interlude that produced a lot of buildings that haven't aged particularly well. There's a bit of love it or hate it with many postmodern buildings. Some find their playfulness refreshing, others find it contrived or even kitschy. Remember the less is more mantra of Mies van der Rohe? Postmodern architect Robert Venturi famously retorted with less is a bore, which perfectly captures the spirit of this stylistic rebellion. You see this new approach not just in corporate skyscrapers, but also in cultural institutions and even some residential buildings. The Equitable Tower, now AXA Equitable Center, completed in 1985 and designed by Edward Larrabee Barnes, with its massive archway and Roy Lichtenstein mural in the atrium, has a distinct postmodern sensibility in its grand, referential gesture. The World Financial Center, now Brookfield Place, designed by Cesar Pelli and completed in the late 1980s, with its distinctive geometric tops, a dome, a pyramid, a step pyramid, and a truncated pyramid, for each of its four towers, is another key example of postmodern urbanism, creating a new civic space at Battery Park City. These tops were explicitly designed to give each tower an individual identity, a direct contrast to the uniformity of many modernist developments. The emphasis is on communication, on buildings that speak to the public, often through recognizable symbols or forms, however playfully distorted. There's a sense that architecture should be more than just functional. It should also tell a story, evoke a mood, or even make you smile. It's a reaction against the perceived elitism and abstraction of high modernism. You can imagine architects gleefully sketching a giant keystone for a doorway, or deciding to clad a section of a building in bright blue-green tiles just because it felt right, a far cry from the sober deliberations over the precise tint of bronze for a Miesian facade. This era certainly brought a new visual vibrancy to the city, a welcome change for many after the cool detachment of the international style. Whether all of its creations will stand the test of time as gracefully as, say, the Chrysler Building remains to be seen. But there's no denying that postmodernism shook things up, injecting a dose of humor, history, and bold color into the New York skyline, proving that even a city built on relentless modernity could occasionally look over its shoulder and have a good laugh with its past. It's like the city decided to throw on a brightly patterned Hawaiian shirt over its business suit. While postmodernism was busy redecorating the city with a playful, sometimes irreverent, nod to history, another equally powerful, though often less flamboyant, movement was gaining critical momentum: historic preservation. You're now witnessing a growing awareness that New York's incredible architectural heritage was not an infinite resource, and that many of its finest buildings were disappearing at an alarming rate, often sacrificed for newer, larger, and not always better structures. The out with the old, in with the new mentality that characterized much of the mid-20th century was finally facing a significant challenge. The most galvanizing moment, the one that truly ignited the modern preservation movement in New York City, was the demolition of Pennsylvania Station in 1963. This wasn't just any old building. It was a monumental Beaux-Arts masterpiece designed by McKim, Mead and Amp, White, completed in 1910. Its vast, light-filled concourse, modeled on the ancient Roman baths of Caracalla, was one of the great public spaces in the world. Its destruction, to make way for the current Madison Square Garden and a rather uninspired office tower, was seen by many as an act of civic vandalism. The outcry was immense, though it came too late to save the station itself. It's a mainstream historical fact that the loss of Penn Station led directly to the passage of New York City's Landmarks Law in 1965, a crucial piece of legislation that gave the city the power to designate historic landmarks and districts, offering them protection from demolition or insensitive alteration. You can almost hear the ghostly echoes of the Grand Concourse, a constant reminder of what was lost and why preservation became so vital. We used to enter the city like gods, lamented architectural historian Vincent Scully. Now we scuttle in like rats. This new landmarks law wasn't universally popular, especially with developers who saw it as an impediment to progress and profit. There were, and continue to be, many hard-fought battles over which buildings deserve landmark status and what owners can or cannot do with their designated properties. But the tide had turned. No longer could a magnificent structure be torn down simply because someone wanted to build something bigger on the site. You begin to see a shift in public consciousness, a growing appreciation for the layers of history that make New York so unique. One quirky tidbit from the early days of the preservation movement is the sometimes desperate and creative tactics used by activists to draw attention to endangered buildings. There were protests, picket lines, and even architectural bake sales to raise funds and awareness. Imagine trying to save a grand 19th century cast iron building by selling cupcakes decorated with tiny edible Corinthian columns. It was a grassroots effort fueled by a passion for the city's architectural soul. You'll notice efforts to save not just individual monumental buildings, but entire historic districts. Areas like Greenwich Village, with its charming Federal and Greek Revival row houses, Soho, with its unparalleled collection of cast iron architecture, remember those facades from Section 4, and Brooklyn Heights, with its stately brownstones, were among the early districts to be designated. This approach recognized that the character of a neighborhood often comes from the sum of its parts, not just a few standout structures. Walking through these preserved districts, you can feel the texture of history, the human scale, the sense of continuity that had been erased in many urban renewal areas. Historians still argue about the right balance between preservation and new development in a dynamic, ever-changing city like New York. How much of the past should be preserved, and at what cost? When does preservation become an obstacle to necessary growth and adaptation? These are ongoing debates with no easy answers. The concept of adaptive reuse becomes increasingly important, finding new uses for old buildings rather than tearing them down. Old warehouses are converted into trendy lofts and art galleries. Former banks become restaurants or event spaces, and decommissioned churches find new life as community centers or even homes. This approach allows the city to retain its historic fabric while still accommodating contemporary needs. Grand Central Terminal, that Beaux-Arts marvel we admired earlier, itself faced a serious threat of demolition or drastic alteration in the 1970s. A plan was floated to build a massive office tower on top of it, which would have destroyed much of its architectural integrity. Its salvation, spearheaded by figures like Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis and affirmed by a landmark Supreme Court decision, Penn Central Transportation Company v. New York City, 1978, was a major victory for the preservation movement and set a crucial legal precedent upholding the constitutionality of landmarks laws. The battle for Grand Central showed that even the most iconic structures were not safe without active protection. You see a growing sophistication in the techniques of restoration and conservation. Architects and craftspeople learn to repair and replicate historic materials, from terracotta ornamentation to stained glass windows. Facades are cleaned, revealing their original beauty. Interiors are meticulously restored to their former glory. It's a slow, painstaking process, often requiring specialized skills and a deep understanding of historic building practices. It's the opposite of the quick, profit-driven demolition and construction cycle. It's about stewardship, about recognizing that these buildings have value beyond their immediate economic utility. The success of the preservation movement means that New York, despite its relentless drive for the new, has managed to keep an astonishing amount of its architectural history intact. You can walk from a street of 18th century townhouses to a gleaming Art Deco skyscraper, then to a block of 19th century cast iron lofts, all within a few blocks. This rich tapestry is a direct result of those hard-fought preservation battles. The city is a living museum, not one where artifacts are kept under glass, but where history is lived in, worked in, and constantly reinterpreted, thanks to the foresight and dedication of those who believe that the past was worth saving. The ghosts of lost buildings like Penn Station serve as a powerful reminder of what's at stake. As postmodernism's playful, often colorful, rebellion against modernist austerity began to wane in the late 1980s and 1990s, the architectural landscape didn't settle into a single, dominant style. Instead, you find a period of fragmentation and divergence, with several distinct, sometimes competing, aesthetic approaches emerging. It's as if architects, having broken free from the rigid rules of modernism, and then tired of postmodernism's overt historicism, were now exploring more personal, often more abstract, avenues of expression. The certainties of previous eras give way to a more questioning, sometimes unsettling architectural language. One prominent, though perhaps more academically than popularly embraced, direction is deconstructivism. This isn't a unified style so much as an approach influenced by postmodern philosophy and Russian constructivist art from the early 20th century. Deconstructivist architecture often appears fragmented, disjointed, and deliberately off-kilter. You see buildings with clashing angles, skewed geometries, and surfaces that seem to peel away or collide. It's an architecture that challenges conventional notions of harmony, stability, and order. Think of it as architecture that looks like it's in the middle of either exploding or imploding, captured at a very precise, very stylish moment. While New York doesn't have as many landmark deconstructivist buildings as some other global cities, the influence of architects like Frank Gehry, whose later work like the IAC building shows some of these tendencies, Zaha Hadid, and Daniel Libeskind was certainly felt in the discourse and in smaller projects or unbuilt proposals. These designs often aim to provoke a sense of unease or to question the very nature of shelter and form. They reject the idea of a building as a simple, easily understood object. The finished product might look like a controlled accident, a beautifully composed pile-up of forms. One quirky tidbit is that critics sometimes derisively refer to this as earthquake chic or architecture that looks like it lost a fight. It's definitely not the kind of architecture you'd expect to find on a tea cozy. Alongside this more radical, form-bending exploration, you also see the rise of what's often termed high-tech architecture. This approach celebrates the aesthetics of technology and engineering. Structural elements, mechanical systems, and building services, things that were traditionally hidden, are often exposed and expressed as key parts of the design. You see buildings with intricate steel trusses, exposed ductwork, and a general emphasis on precision, lightness, and industrial materials like glass, steel, and aluminum. It's a kind of hyperfunctionalism, where the way a building works is made visually explicit and becomes a primary source of its aesthetic power. Think of it as architecture wearing its skeleton and its internal organs on the outside, all buffed and polished. While London and Paris have more famous examples, like the Pompidou Center or Lloyd's of London, elements of high-tech thinking influenced the detailing and expressive structure of some New York buildings from this period, particularly in commercial and institutional projects. This focus on technology also dovetails with an increasing, though still nascent, concern for building performance and efficiency, a precursor to the more explicit sustainability movement that would follow. Advanced glazing systems, sophisticated climate control, and the integration of new technologies become increasingly important. The idea is to create buildings that are not just visually striking, but also highly functional and responsive to their environment and occupants. Historians still argue whether this late-century fragmentation represented a creative flourishing, with architects free to pursue diverse individual visions, or a lack of clear direction and a retreat into overly academic or self-referential concerns. Perhaps it was a bit of both. The grand, unifying narratives of modernism and even the playful historicism of postmodernism had run their course, and architects were exploring new frontiers, sometimes in very different directions. You might also notice a more refined, minimalist aesthetic in some quarters, a sort of neo-modernism that revisits the clean lines and unadorned surfaces of the international style, but perhaps with a warmer material palette or a greater sensitivity to context. This isn't a full-blown revival, but rather an acknowledgement that some of modernism's core principles, clarity, simplicity, functional elegance, still held appeal, especially when stripped of its more dogmatic or socially utopian baggage. It's like rediscovering a classic black dress in the back of the closet and realizing it still looks fantastic. Corporate architecture continues to evolve, with office towers often seeking a balance between a prestigious image and the practical demands of flexible, technologically advanced workspaces. The design of atriums and public spaces within these buildings also receives more attention, reflecting a growing understanding of the importance of shared amenities and a more humane work environment. You're less likely to see the vast, anonymous plazas of mid-century modernism and more likely to find interior gardens, art installations, or carefully designed retail frontages that engage with the street. This is not an era easily defined by a single, catchy label like Art Deco or Beaux-Arts. It's more of a choose-your-own adventure, period in architecture. The certainties that once guided design have fractured, leading to a more pluralistic, sometimes confusing, but often very inventive architectural landscape. The city's skyline continues to change, but now with a more diverse cast of characters, each building speaking in a slightly different, sometimes highly idiosyncratic architectural voice. The monolithic chorus of earlier styles has given way to a complex, polyphonic urban song. The dawn of the new millennium brings with it a fresh wave of architectural energy, but also a profound and tragic event that would forever alter New York's skyline and its psyche. You're now navigating the early 21st century, a period marked by the rise of global starchitects, an increasing emphasis on sustainable or green design, and the city's resilient response to the devastation of September 11, 2001. Before that pivotal day, the architectural trends of the late 20th century continued to evolve. You see more buildings designed by internationally renowned architects, the starchitects, whose signature styles become global brands. Names like Frank Gehry, Jean Nouvel, Norman Foster, and Renzo Piano start to leave their mark on the New York landscape, often with high-profile cultural institutions, luxury residential towers, or corporate headquarters. Gehry's IAC Building, 2007, on the west side, with its billowing, sail-like fritted glass facade, is a striking example of his sculptural approach. It looks like a ship from a futuristic dream, or perhaps a giant, elegantly crumpled piece of paper. This kind of architecture is often highly expressive, formally complex, and reliant on advanced digital design and fabrication technologies. Alongside this aesthetic experimentation, a much more urgent concern comes to the forefront: sustainability. You begin to hear terms like LEED certification, leadership in energy and environmental design, green roofs, rainwater harvesting, and energy efficiency becoming central to the architectural discourse. Buildings are increasingly designed not just for their visual impact or functional efficiency, but for their environmental performance. The Bank of America Tower at 1 Bryant Park, completed 2009, Cook Fox Architects, was designed to be one of the world's most environmentally friendly skyscrapers, incorporating features like floor-to-ceiling insulated glazing to maximize natural light, an ice cooling system, and a cogeneration plant. It's a mainstream historical fact that it was the first skyscraper design to achieve Platinum LEED certification. This marks a significant shift from simply making buildings look good to making them do good, environmentally speaking. You see more buildings incorporating vegetated roofs, which help manage stormwater, reduce heat island effect, and provide amenity space. Materials are chosen for their recycled content, low embodied energy, and non-toxic properties. There's a growing understanding that architecture has a profound impact on the planet and a responsibility to mitigate that impact. One quirky tidbit is the rise of biophilic design, an approach that seeks to connect building occupants more closely with nature by incorporating natural light, views of nature, natural materials, and living plants into the built environment. It's like finally acknowledging that humans aren't just cogs in a machine, but actually benefit from a bit of sunshine and a nice plant. Yes, Mr. Johnson, that ficus in the corner is a crucial component of our Q3 productivity targets. Then the unimaginable happens. The attacks of September 11th, 2001 destroy the World Trade Center towers, leaving a gaping wound in the heart of Lower Manhattan and in the collective spirit of the city. The Twin Towers, designed by Minoru Yamasaki and completed in 1973, were themselves controversial examples of modernist gigantism, but they have become undeniably potent symbols of New York's global reach and resilience. Their sudden, violent absence creates an enormous void, both physically and emotionally. The process of deciding what to build at ground zero is fraught and complex, involving countless stakeholders, deeply emotional considerations, and intense public scrutiny. Historians still argue, and will likely continue to argue for generations, about the successes and failures of the World Trade Center master plan and the individual buildings and memorials that have risen on the site. The design for the new World Trade Center site, spearheaded by Daniel Libeskind's master plan, aims to balance remembrance with renewal, commerce with commemoration. You see the slow, determined rise of One World Trade Center, completed 2014, Skidmore, Owings and Amp, Merrill, its tapering form and soaring spire designed to echo the Statue of Liberty and reclaim a sense of aspirational height for the skyline. The National September 11th Memorial, with its two sunken reflecting pools marking the footprints of the original towers, designed by Michael Arad and Peter Walker, becomes a profoundly moving space for remembrance and contemplation. Its quiet dignity is a powerful counterpoint to the bustling commercial activity that gradually returns to the site. The rebuilding effort spurs innovation in structural engineering, life safety systems, and secure building design. There's a renewed focus on creating resilient structures that can withstand extreme events and on designing public spaces that feel both open and secure. The architectural language of the new World Trade Center buildings is generally more subdued, less overtly flamboyant than some of the Starchitect creations elsewhere in the city. There's a sobriety, a sense of gravitas, appropriate to the site's history. This period is a testament to New York's enduring spirit. The city mourns, it reflects, and then it rebuilds, as it has done so many times throughout its history after fires, financial crises, and other calamities. The focus on green building continues to grow, not just as an environmental imperative, but also as a mark of responsible, forward-thinking development. The skyline is changing once more, shaped by global design trends, urgent environmental concerns, and the indelible memory of a day that changed everything. The city is healing, and its architecture is both a reflection of that process and an active participant in it, creating new symbols of hope and resilience for a new century. The architectural story of New York in the more recent years, say from the 2010s onwards, is dramatically characterized by two interconnected phenomena: the rise of the supertall luxury residential tower and the extensive, ongoing redevelopment and reclamation of the city's vast waterfront. You're witnessing a new kind of verticality, one driven less by corporate prestige and more by the global ultra-wealthy's desire for exclusive sky-high living, alongside a horizontal transformation that's reconnecting the city to the water that has always defined it. First, Let's crane our necks way up. A new breed of skyscraper is piercing the clouds, particularly along a stretch of Midtown Manhattan, now somewhat controversially dubbed Billionaire's Row, around 57th Street. These are the supertalls, generally defined as buildings over 300 meters or roughly 984 feet, and many of them are shockingly slender. Buildings like 432, Park Avenue, Raphael Viñoly, 2015, with its stark, almost minimalist grid of enormous square windows and its extreme 1:15 slenderness ratio, have become instant, if divisive, icons. It's so tall and thin it almost looks like a digital rendering, a glitch in the matrix of the skyline. Others, like One Vanderbilt, Cone Peterson Fox, 2020, while primarily commercial, also reach supertall status, integrating directly with Grand Central Terminal and aiming for a more civic-minded presence. What's driving this? Advances in engineering and material science allow for these incredibly slender profiles. Sophisticated damping systems are required to counteract wind sway at such heights. You wouldn't want your penthouse view to come with a side of motion sickness. But the primary driver is economic. The ability to sell apartments with unparalleled panoramic views for tens, even hundreds of millions of dollars. These are not your average New York apartments. They are pied a terre for a global elite, often sitting empty for much of the year. It's a mainstream historical fact that the proliferation of these super tall residential towers has sparked considerable debate about their impact on the city, from the shadows they cast on Central Park to issues of economic inequality and their contribution, or lack thereof, to the city's broader housing needs. One quirky tidbit is the engineering challenge of simply getting concrete to such extreme heights. Specialized pumps and concrete mixes are required, and the logistics of construction on a tiny footprint in a dense urban environment are mind-boggling. Imagine trying to pour concrete for the 90th floor while tourists are snapping selfies 1,000 feet below. It's high-altitude, high-stakes Jenga. The architectural expression of these towers varies. Some, like 432, Park Avenue, are almost defiantly minimalist. Others, like Steinway Tower, 111, West 57th Street, Shop Architects, 2021, the world's most slender skyscraper with a height-to-width ratio of about 124, incorporate historical references. It rises from the landmark Steinway Hall and feature tapering bronze and terracotta facades, trying to blend extreme modernity with a nod to classic New York Art Deco. While these needles prick the sky, a vast transformation is happening at eye level along the city's hundreds of miles of waterfront. For much of the 20th century, New York's waterfronts were largely industrial, inaccessible, and often polluted, lined with decaying piers, warehouses, and highways. Now, you see a concerted effort to reclaim these edges for public use, recreation, and new development. Brooklyn Bridge Park, stretching along the East River with stunning views of the Manhattan skyline, is a prime example. Former shipping piers have been transformed into lush parkland, sports fields, playgrounds, and calm water basins for kayaking. It's a stunning reinvention of post-industrial space. Similarly, the Hudson River Park, running for miles along Manhattan's west side, has turned a once derelict stretch into a beloved greenway for cycling, walking, and recreation, with beautifully landscaped piers offering everything from gardens to performance spaces. This isn't just about creating parks. It's about a fundamental rethinking of the city's relationship with the water. Historians still argue about the ideal balance in waterfront redevelopment between public access, ecological restoration, and private development. Many of these new parks are funded, in part, by allowing new residential and commercial buildings on adjacent sites, leading to debates about gentrification and the privatization of public benefits. You see innovative pier designs like Little Island, Thomas Heatherwick, 2021, a whimsical park built on sculptural concrete tulips rising from the Hudson River on the site of the former Pier 55. It's a fantastical, almost surreal addition to the waterfront, a piece of landscape architecture as public art. All along the East River, the Bronx River, and around Staten Island and Queens, similar efforts are underway, albeit at varying scales, to create more resilient, accessible, and engaging waterfronts. This involves not just landscape architecture, but also significant infrastructure work, including flood defenses, a growing concern in the age of climate change, and ecological restoration projects to improve water quality and revive marine habitats. This blue and green renaissance is changing the daily experience of countless New Yorkers, providing much-needed open space and reconnecting neighborhoods to their aquatic front yards. It's a far cry from the days when the waterfront was a place you hurried past, not a destination in itself. The architectural language of the new buildings rising along these waterfronts often emphasizes views, light, and a connection to the outdoors, with extensive use of glass, balconies, and terraces. It's a more outward-looking architecture than the introspective canyons of Midtown. The city is turning its face to the water again, and in doing so, rediscovering a vital part of its identity and creating a new legacy of public space for future generations. As you continue your journey through New York's architectural narrative, you find yourself squarely in the present, looking towards an uncertain but fascinating future. The challenges facing the city are immense, but so too is the ingenuity of the architects, engineers, and planners tasked with shaping its next chapter. The dominant concerns you see reflected in new projects and urban discussions revolve around climate resilience, housing affordability, and the ongoing quest for innovative and sustainable building technologies. The city is not just building taller or reclaiming waterfronts. It's grappling with existential threats and trying to reinvent itself as a more equitable and durable place. The most pressing issue is undoubtedly climate change and its impact on a coastal city like New York. Superstorm Sandy in 2012 was a brutal wake-up call, exposing the vulnerability of vast swathes of the city to flooding and storm surges. In response, you see a massive effort to design and implement resilient infrastructure. The Big U, now largely known as East Side Coastal Resiliency Project and other related initiatives, a proposed system of berms, flood walls, and deployable barriers designed to protect Lower Manhattan, is a hugely ambitious example. It's not just about hard engineering. It's also about integrating these protective measures into the urban fabric as parks, greenways, and public amenities. You can imagine a future where a landscaped hill in a park also serves as a critical flood defense, its dual purpose hidden in plain sight. Architects are increasingly designing buildings in flood-prone areas with wet floodproofing, allowing floodwaters to pass through non-critical lower levels, or dry floodproofing, making buildings watertight. Mechanical systems are being moved from basements to higher floors. New building codes are mandating more resilient construction standards. It's a mainstream historical fact that cities around the world are now looking to New York, among other coastal metropolises, for innovative approaches to climate adaptation. One quirky tidbit is the rise of amphibious architecture concepts, buildings designed to float during a flood, though these are more experimental and less common in dense urban areas like New York. Still, it makes you wonder if one day your walk-up apartment might come with an optional tidal mooring. Housing affordability is another critical challenge. The city that historically welcomed waves of immigrants with relatively accessible housing now finds itself one of the most expensive places to live in the world. You see architects and planners exploring various solutions: micro-apartments, co-living spaces, inclusionary zoning policies, requiring developers to include affordable units in new projects, and innovative approaches to modular and prefabricated construction to reduce costs and speed up delivery. The debate around density continues. How to add more housing without overwhelming existing infrastructure or destroying neighborhood character. This involves looking at underutilized land, converting obsolete office buildings to residential use, and exploring new typologies for communal living. Historians of the future will undoubtedly scrutinize how effectively 21st century New York addressed this housing crisis. Was enough done to ensure the city remained accessible to people from all economic backgrounds? Or did it become exclusively a playground for the wealthy? The social fabric of the city depends on the answers to these questions. You see pilot projects for 3D printed houses in other parts of the world, and while not yet a mainstream solution in New York, the search for disruptive technologies that can make housing cheaper and faster to build is relentless. Innovative building technologies continue to evolve beyond just resilience and affordability. Smart building systems, integrating AI and the Internet of Things, IoT, to optimize energy use, manage building operations, and enhance occupant comfort, are becoming standard. Material science is producing new composites, self-healing concrete, and even bioconcrete that incorporates bacteria to repair cracks. There's a growing interest in mass timber construction, using engineered wood products like cross-laminated timber or CLT as a more sustainable alternative to steel and concrete for mid-rise and even some taller buildings. CLT is strong, lighter than concrete, and sequesters carbon. You might see more wooden skyscrapers in the future, a surprising return to an ancient material, albeit in a highly engineered form. The very nature of work in retail is also changing, accelerated by the pandemic, and this has profound implications for architecture. What is the future of the office building when more people work remotely? How do retail spaces adapt in an age of e-commerce? You see a blurring of lines. Offices designed to feel more like homes or social clubs, retail spaces becoming more experiential, and a greater emphasis on mixed-use developments where people can live, work, and play in close proximity. The 15-minute city concept, where most daily necessities are accessible within a short walk or bike ride, is gaining traction as a model for more sustainable and livable urbanism. The future city is also a data-driven city. Urban planners and architects are using vast amounts of data to understand how people use urban spaces, to model the impact of new developments, and to optimize city services. This raises important questions about privacy and surveillance, but also offers powerful tools for creating more responsive and efficient urban environments. You're stepping into a future where your movements through the city might be subtly shaping its next architectural iteration, one algorithm at a time. The city is becoming a complex, adaptive organism, constantly learning and evolving. Its architecture the physical manifestation of these ongoing transformations. And so, as our long night's journey through the architectural layers of New York begins to draw to a close, you find yourself standing once more on that metaphorical street corner, but now with eyes that see so much more than just glass, steel, and stone. You see the ghostly outlines of Lenape longhouses beneath the pavement, the faint echo of Dutch gables in the narrow lots of Lower Manhattan, the orderly phantom limbs of the 1811 grid stretching out beneath the avenues. Each era has left its indelible mark, creating a city that is not just a collection of buildings, but a living, breathing museum of human ambition, ingenuity, folly, and resilience. The concrete canvas of New York is never static. It is in a perpetual state of becoming. The skyscrapers that seemed like the ultimate definitive statements of their time, the Woolworth, the Chrysler, the Empire State, are now revered ancestors, elder statesmen in a constantly growing family of structures. The international style boxes that once seemed so starkly modern now possess a certain retro coolness, contextualized by the postmodern playfulness that followed and the diverse expressions of the 21st century. You can trace the entire history of modern architecture just by walking a few dozen blocks, a truly remarkable urban phenomenon. Think back to the sheer audacity of those early builders, pushing materials and techniques to their limits, often with little more than slide rules, determination, and perhaps an unhealthy disregard for personal safety at extreme heights. Remember the sky boys riveting steel beams hundreds of feet in the air, or the stonemasons meticulously carving Gothic tracery for the Cathedral of Commerce. Their labor, their skill, and their vision are embedded in the very fabric of the city. It's a mainstream historical fact that New York has more square footage of office space than any other city in the world, a testament to its enduring role as a global center of commerce and culture, all housed within this extraordinary architectural tapestry. One final quirky tidbit for you. Throughout its history, New York has been home to countless paper architects, designers whose grand, often fantastical, visions for the city never left the drawing board. There are unbuilt projects for floating airports, colossal megastructures spanning the Hudson, and all manner of utopian and dystopian schemes. These unbuilt dreams, though invisible on the streets, are also part of the city's architectural DNA, reflecting the boundless imagination that New York inspires. Sometimes what wasn't built is just as telling as what was. Imagine a New York with a giant habitable sphere in the middle of Central Park, a wild, unbuilt vision from the 1960s. Historians still argue, and will continue to argue, about which architectural period was New York's greatest or which buildings best define its spirit. Is it the romantic ambition of Art Deco, the powerful elegance of the Beaux-Arts, the sleek modernism of the mid-century, or the daring, sometimes bewildering, forms of contemporary design? The truth is, there's no single answer, because New York is all of these things and more. Its genius lies in its multiplicity, its ability to absorb and reflect so many different styles, ambitions, and eras. It's a city that wears its history openly, sometimes messily, but always with a certain undeniable swagger. The challenges we touched upon in the previous section, climate change, affordability, social equity, will continue to shape the city's architectural future. Architects will need to be more resourceful, more innovative, and more socially conscious than ever before. The push for sustainability will only intensify, driving new material choices, new energy systems, and new ways of thinking about the relationship between buildings and the natural environment. The city will continue to reinvent itself, as it always has, adapting to new realities while trying to preserve the best of its past. You look up at the skyline one last time, a dazzling, ever-shifting silhouette against the fading light. It's a testament to human endeavor, a complex, sometimes contradictory, but ultimately awe-inspiring creation. Each building tells a story of an individual architect's vision, of a particular moment in time, of the economic forces and cultural aspirations that shaped it. And these stories are still being written every day with every new foundation laid, every old facade restored, every bold new design that reaches for the sky. New York is a conversation between the past, the present, and the future, spoken in the language of architecture. It is a city that is constantly being made and remade, a concrete canvas that is never truly finished, always promising another layer, another story, another evolution in its remarkable architectural saga. The city, even as it prepares for sleep or for its next burst of relentless energy, holds these stories for you. The very air seems to hum with the echoes of construction, of design debates, of stylistic revolutions. You've walked through centuries tonight, witnessing the transformation of a wooded island into one of the most iconic urban landscapes on Earth. And now, as the narrative of steel and stone, of ambition and adaptation, gently fades, you can allow your own thoughts to drift. The architectural marvels, the human stories embedded in their foundations, the sheer scale of all, can now become a soft backdrop to your own well-deserved rest. The great urban symphony of New York, with its soaring crescendos of Art Deco spires and its quieter passages of federal row houses, begins to soften. The sharp lines of skyscrapers blur into the deepening twilight of your imagination. Their once glittering lights, now distant, twinkling stars. You feel the immense weight of all that history, all that stone and steel and glass, settling gently around you, no longer demanding attention, but offering a profound sense of stability, of deep roots anchoring you to this narrative. The vibrant pulse of the city, the endless construction and reconstruction, slows to a more measured, rhythmic beat, like a giant heart preparing for slumber. Remember the quiet dignity of those early Lenape wigwams. Nestled in the island's many hills, their forms so attuned to the natural world. Feel the sturdy pragmatism of the Dutch gables, a distant echo in the city's oldest streets. Let the ordered elegance of Georgian facades and the optimistic grace of federal townhouses lull you with their symmetry and proportion. The grand revivals, Greek and Gothic, now seem like noble, sleeping giants, their dramatic pronouncements hushed. Even the bold metallic gleam of cast iron facades softens, their intricate details dissolving into the gentle shadows. The Gilded Age palaces, once so opulent, now seem like tranquil, protected memories, their marble halls quiet and still. The thrilling race for the sky, that early burst of skyscraper ambition, has run its course for tonight, its competitive clamor replaced by a respectful silence among the clouds. The dazzling, jazz-age sparkle of Art Deco now offers a softer, more diffused glow, its sharp angles and sunbursts mellowed by the encroaching calm. The cool, glass boxes of modernism, once so stark, now reflect the gentle light of a dreamscape, their transparency offering a peaceful vista. Postmodernism's playful colors and historical winks become less distinct, blending into a harmonious, if slightly whimsical, whole. The hard-fought victories of preservationists ensure that these layers of time rest securely, cherished, and protected. The divergent paths of late-century styles, the futuristic visions of Millennium Towers, the slender supertalls, and the revitalized waterfronts all merge into a single, vast panorama of human endeavor, now at peace. The future challenges, the ongoing evolution, can wait for a new dawn. As the final images recede, replaced by the quiet darkness behind your eyelids, allow the sheer endurance of this city, its constant reinvention, to be a source of comfort. It's a story of resilience, of endless possibility, a reminder that even the grandest structures are built one piece at a time, just as sleep comes one soft breath at a time. Let the gentle cadence of this journey guide you into a deep and restful slumber, secure in the knowledge that the story, like the city itself, will always be there. Sweet dreams.